Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. Jim not only joins us by phone today, he joins us from the New Jersey transit system. So, Jim, as I just mentioned to you before we started, I'm sure you're surrounded by like-minded conservatives.
Yeah, they're all great folks. And, so far we haven't encountered any traffic problems inspired by any governors. It's a funny thing, Greg. I'm actually on my way out to New York for the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dance party. Everyone thinks it should be a lot of fun. And, I can't wait to show her my moves. She was very impressive the other day.
It was. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know a lot of folks assumed you're headed to New York to interview for the New York Jets coaching job, but I've been trying to tell people Jim is holding out for the general manager's position. He's not interested in being the coach.
Exactly. As Bill Parcells said, if you want me to cook the meal, you got to let me buy the groceries.
That's right. So you take a package deal. You could be coach and GM. But,
yes, there you go.
Okay. Well, there you go. There you go, Jets. He's in town, so strike while the iron is hot. All right, let's get to the good martini, Jim. And some eyes may glaze over when you start talking about regulations. It's not the sexiest topic. It's not like there's really great sound bites a lot of the time when it comes to regulation, but it's really important. It's really important to business. It's really important to freedom when you're able to roll back what the oppressive agencies of the government sometimes do to people, particularly from the EPA and other places. And there's good news from the Competitive Enterprise Institute about what the Trump administration is doing on this front. This is written up at the Washington Examiner by Paul Bedard. It says President Trump has made good and then some on his pledge to slash costly federal regulations, issuing the fewest new rules in recorded history in his first 2 years, according to a new analysis. In fact, the efforts by the White House, Office of Management and Budget, and several agencies to cut and reduce the flow of regulations this year have only ever been topped once by the same Trump team last year. And according to CEI, the number of Trump regulations in 2018 is 3,367, which still sounds pretty high. But then CEI's Clyde Wayne Cruz Jr. points out that Trump's number of new regulations is actually lower because you actually need to issue a new regulation to kill an old one. And so a lot of the new regulations were actually to kill old ones. So obviously work to do, but this is one of the areas we wanted to see progress on. And for all the grief we give Trump, deservedly so, on a number of other fronts, he's done a great job here.
Greg, I want to take listeners back to the early Mesozoic era of the first term of President George W. Bush. Back then, I was working for a wire service called States News Service, and one of the things we did to find story ideas was each day we got a copy of the Federal Register either sent to us or available online, and we would go through it day by day looking for story ideas. And usually you could find some good scoop or something interesting in changes of regulations, proposals of regulations, things like that. Sometimes the EPA. I ended up doing a lot of work on fisheries restrictions and closing of ports and all kinds of stuff like that. And some days it was very thick, some days it was very thin. As a really good example of just how much the Trump administration has slowed down the issuance of these regulations, I believe either the end of last year or the very beginning of this year, the Federal Register for the day was one page.
Wow.
I can tell you, having spent a lot of time going through them, that is almost unheard of. The more complicated the regulations, the longer they're going to be. So generally, it's not a perfect measurement, but it's a useful measurement to look at the length of the Federal Register. It is getting shorter, and as you said, sometimes you have to pass a new regulation in order to undo an old one. But either way, it's generally a good sign. And I think it's safe to say, particularly you look at the job numbers and general performance of the economy the last 2 years, the U.S. economy and the private sector is responding to this.
Yes, excellent. 3,281 regulations under Trump a year ago, and that's the lowest number since the records have even been kept since the mid-1970s. So well done, Trump administration, on that front. Keep going. Let's move over to our bad martini now, Jim. And yesterday, as we said, and as everybody knows, the Democrats took control of the House. Nancy Pelosi is the speaker once again, and they moved forward on a couple of different things, one of which was a bill to reopen the government, at least the part of it that's currently shut down, and it passed. Here's what it says at CNN. House Democrats on Thursday approved a legislative package aimed at ending the partial government shutdown while rejecting President Donald Trump's demand for additional funding for a border wall despite a White House veto threat. As a result, the legislation is expected to be dead on arrival in the Senate, leaving congressional Democrats and the administration at a stalemate that threatens to prolong the shutdown, which is wrapping up its second week. The vote was 239 to 192, with 5 Republicans joining the Democrats. CNN's right about this being dead on arrival in the Senate. In fact, Mitch McConnell said so the day before the new Congress started. Here's what he had to say about this legislation from the Democrats, which has a whole bunch of pro-abortion stuff in there, but nothing for the wall. Here's what he said.
The legislation that House Democrats are reportedly planning to introduce and be voted on tomorrow will not be a serious contribution to the negotiations that are going on between the administration and the incoming Democratic majority in the House. It isn't comprehensive. It ignores the needs of border security. It's exactly the kind of proposal you'd expect if the incoming House Democrats were choosing to stage a political sideshow rather than doing the hard work of helping to govern the country.
As usual, Jim, we need to admonish Senator McConnell he just needs to calm down, stop the table pounding. The histrionics are not going to help. But obviously, he's right. He knew what was in this bill. It's basically a political game to the Democrats, and he's right that it could never get 60 votes in the Senate, even though the Democrats insist that it could if they actually got a vote. So the Republicans seem to be standing strong on this, although I'm sure it's flexible on the amount of wall funding they're willing to accept here at some point.
Yeah. You know, I understand that when you get into a showdown like this, you're going to end up with a certain amount of posturing, a certain amount of symbolic gestures. You're going to vote for particular legislation to kind of lay down a marker of saying this is what we want. But really, look, we're in, day 11, day 12, day 13. The time for these sorts of symbolic gestures has passed. It's time to get down to brass tacks. It's time to start talking about where you're willing to give a little bit of ground if you want this government shutdown to end. And it does not indicate that that there's any progress on much of a front. Yes, I understand House Democrats wanted to vote for a budget that indicated what they thought was important and what they thought was a priority. Look, guys, it's never get through a Republican Senate. Trump's not going to sign it. Let's see. Fine, you did it. Let's get down to brass tacks. Let's get down to the real negotiations, and enough with this kind of symbolic gestures you can use in fundraising emails and all that kind of stuff.
The Democrats want to flex their muscles, of course. The Republicans have better numbers than they had in the Senate before. So if these different parts of the government are to ever open again, they're going to have to come to some agreement on the wall funding, because it's pretty clear Trump and now the congressional leaders are not going to budge on that. All right, let's move to our crazy martini now, Jim. And as we know, there's a lot of new members of Congress, a few new ones in the Senate, and a lot of new ones, obviously, in the House, a lot of new Democrats, one of which is Rashida Tlaib. Rashida Tlaib is a Democrat from Michigan's 13th Congressional District. That was the seat held for decades by John Conyers until he was forced to resign as part of the Me Too purge of the past couple of years. Rashida Tlaib won a very competitive Democratic primary and then easily won the general election. It's a very, very heavily Democratic district there in Detroit. Shortly after winning the election, she went on CNN and sat with John Berman, who asked her if she was going to vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. And here's that quick exchange.
Will you vote for Nancy Pelosi?
Probably not.
Probably not.
That's my answer. No, probably not.
And so she went on to say that Pelosi didn't do enough about poverty, didn't speak enough about eradicating poverty, and so that led to this.
Is she one of the people you're referring to as a Democratic sellout?
Look, I don't know. All I can tell you is she doesn't speak about the issues that are important to the families of the 13th Congressional District, and they are a priority for me.
Jim, I'll give you one guess who she voted for Speaker yesterday. It was California's Nancy Pelosi. But Rashida Tlaib is making headlines for other reasons. Last night at a party or a reception, I don't know exactly what it was, she grabbed the mic, and towards the very end of her comments, she talked about when her son, who still calls her mama, so I guess this son is still pretty young, says, "Hey, you won. The bullies aren't going to win." And here's what she had to say, and it has to be bleeped, of course.
And when your son looks at you and says, "Mama, look, you won," bullies don't win. And I said, "Baby, they don't, because we're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the mother."
Jim, anyone who's defended Trump for his tweets and comments and things over the years. Can't exactly pretend to be having the vapors over that. But the Democrats claim that they were the party of maturity and the moral high ground. And it's pretty clear from Brad Sherman yesterday and Rashida Tlaib today that impeachment really is priority number one here for the Democrats, not necessarily helping the middle class. If the Democrats had any sort of deportment high ground, they're ceding that pretty quickly, too.
You know, to quote a wise philosopher, Greg, you stay classy, San Diego. Look, first of all, this kind of indicates that I guess we don't really have to wait for Mueller anymore, do we? Doesn't really matter what he finds. Doesn't matter what the evidence is. They've already decided what the verdict is. And they've already decided what they want to do. I think it's a very, reflects the argument I've made for a long time that Democrats do not see this as a legitimate president, and they don't feel any need to treat the president as that. That's where you start getting into constitutional crisis. That's where you really start getting into the divided country. But the second thing is that just kind of that observation that I suppose we should give her credit for honesty. Let's also point out, though, the number of Democrats that said, oh, we're not going to rush into impeachment. Oh, we're not. This isn't a political partisan vendetta. No. We're going to wait for the evidence. Well, clearly there are a bunch of House Democrats who don't feel this way, who basically believe the purpose of their election was to undo the 2016 election. And I think that may not turn out for them quite as popular and widely supported as they think it will be.
Yeah, and obviously we know that political figures, probably going back all the way, have used pretty rough language. Lyndon Johnson did it all the time. We know what Dick Cheney said to Pat Leahy a decade ago, so this is nothing new in politics. But when it starts to happen in public, you start to wonder whether folks from the Twitter comment section are getting elected to Congress now.
It is, and it's a reflection of coarsening culture. Yes, the president has played more than his share in that trend, but I think, the question then is, okay, what do you want to do about this coarse culture and vulgarity and nastiness and all that kind of stuff? And again, when you basically come into town and saying, this is my goal, we're going to do this, you have to pretty much forfeit any claim that this is based on law and evidence and adjudication and all that stuff. This is basically, I don't think this person should be president. I didn't vote for him. I don't agree with him. And I don't think it's fair that he won, even though he won more votes in the Electoral College. And I'll do anything I can to stop it. And that's, like I said, she's honest. I think a lot of Democrats who feel that way. She's just more honest about it than other folks. Yeah,
you're probably right about that. And we started on football, so we can close on it. I think Dennis Green paraphrased is pretty appropriate here. The Democrats are who we thought they were. It's exactly what they're about in this next Congress.
And Greg, we let them off the hook.
Yes, we did. We let them off the hook. Well, Jim, hopefully the Jets do corral you for an interview, but enjoy your time up there, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right. See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch. Have a great weekend, everyone.